So welcome everyone to the Toronto Roundtable. This was already a crisis, intersectional impact of COVID-19 and gender-based violence against non-status refugee and immigrant women across Canada. On April 30th, 2020, we, the Building Leadership Capacity to Address Gender-Based Violence Against Non-Status Refugee and Immigrant Women Across Canada project, introduced the virtual roundtable series to host conversations and exchanges that consider the differential impacts of COVID-19 for non-status refugee and immigrant women. These webinar series work from a social justice approach that suggests that the more comprehensive analysis and collective discussion of social problems will yield more effective social action, advocacy, strategies, and responses. We want to start by saying thank you for joining us today. We're heartened by the number of people that registered all across Canada. My name is Margarita Pinton-Perez, and I'm the Senior Coordinator of the Initiative to End Gender-Based Violence at OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. Joining me today as co-hosts of this conversation are Nira Elgueta, Project Coordinator for the Gender-Based Violence Building Leadership Capacity at OCASI, and Yasmin Abuzgaya, staff lawyer from the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. We also have Habiba, our placement student, who will be attentive of the chat. Yasmin, I'll let you take over.
All right, hello everyone and welcome. The focus for today's roundtable is on Toronto, and we are the local partner, Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic, joining as facilitators for today. During the roundtable discussion, we will have the participation of 3 speakers. They include Deepa Matu, who is the Executive Director of the Barbara Schleifer Clinic, Lolly Rico, Co-Director of the Refugee Center, and Fatima Philippi, Executive Director of Rexdale Women's Center. We will also hear about initiatives and resources taken up by the Rights of Non-Status Women's Network and Neighbors, Friends, and Families Immigrant and Refugee Communities Campaign.
Nira, I think you're on mute.
Hey, everybody. So for today's meeting, we encourage you to be in a speaker view so you can follow along with our shared screen. We want everybody here today to participate in today's conversation in ways that feel comfortable for you. At the same time, to minimize distractions and keep a safe space, we have disabled the camera option and microphone are mute for all participants, even for me. Throughout today's presentation, we will have one of our team members, Javi, attending the chat. You have the ability to chat with others, send us messages, or message everybody participating today. We encourage you to share your comments, feedback, and if you have any technical issues, we will try our best to support you. Javi will help us compile a list of questions and comments which we aim to address in the last 15 minutes of the session. If we don't get to all of them today, we will do our best to respond and follow up where we share our recordings, PowerPoint, and a feedback survey in the following days. To start with the chat, we encourage you to share your location and organization, networks, and communities you're joining us from.
Great, thank you. And so to our speakers, thank you for joining us. We're just so everyone knows, our cameras might come on and off. We're gonna be having a PowerPoint presented and whoever's the speaker will have their camera on. So to our speakers that are joining the discussion later, we'll call you back on shortly.
Okay, so we will now proceed with a land acknowledgement. This presentation is being hosted on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee. I apologize for mispronouncing that. And most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. Tekaronto, also known as Toronto, is now home to many Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It is important for us from the outset to express our solidarity with Indigenous communities across Turtle Island who continue to experience colonial violence, including intersectional gender-based violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It has been 1 year since the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It is important to reflect on what it means to do this work and host these conversations in this context of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. We also draw from critical race scholars in Canada who have recognized the importance of addressing colonial violence as a first step in healing across communities. We take seriously the notion that Shireen Razak emphasized in 2014, which is that we cannot move into recognizing the humanity of refugees, immigrants, or other people if our day-to-day life is intensely structured by the inhumanity with which we have treated Indigenous people.
So to start, I just want to say it's important for us to acknowledge all of the work that's involved with planning and hosting the Roundtable series. And so this is the project Building Leadership Capacity to Address Gender-Based Violence Against Non-Status Refugee and Immigrant Women Across Canada. We are a growing network of service providers, organizational leaders, community advocates, and academic researchers focused on working together to build national leadership capacity through a community advocacy and a peer champion network across Canada. This is a 5-year project that's funded by Women and Gender Equality as part of their GBV strategy, Canada's strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence. We have partners across 5 regions: Edmonton, Fredericton, Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver. You're seeing here the logo of all of our different partners involved in the project. And as the project develops over the course of 5 years, we hope that this network continues to grow, and we look forward to this national network growing and building further relationships across Canada. Next, Neera is going to take over and review the objectives and the agenda.
Thank you, Margarita. So the next slide that you are going to see now is Margarita. Yes, we're sharing the screen. Is the objective. So as you see there, we have a very ambitious agenda for today. So today we hope to share our promising practices, our blueprint in progress, and learning about community-based advocacy and survival-led work underway in Toronto. We also want to learn how to get in. We want you to learn how to get involved and participate in our blueprint building. Today, we invite you to join our conversation with community members, organizational leaders, and advocates, reflecting on how we do community advocacy work to address gender-based violence against non-status refugee and immigrant women in Toronto, the challenges of advocacy work, and the importance of this work, especially now in the context of COVID-19. Our agenda for today includes an overview of the broader project, a research highlights of our blueprint in progress, a discussion with Toronto community-based advocacy and survival-led work, and the implications of COVID-19. We also have a call to actions for you, and it's about to join our local community advocacy and peer champion network. Just let's keep in mind that today we will cover a lot of information. A copy of the slides and the recording of the presentation will be shared with you on a later date. But remind that if at any point you need to pause, take a break, please do so and check in with yourself and maybe a colleague. Remember that you can post any question in the chat at any point of this presentation, and we will take some time at the end to respond to those questions. Margarita?
Great, thank you, Neera. Thank you. So as Neera says, we are going to very briefly share some of our project background and some of our highlights from research that we conducted last year. I do want to mention that access to the recording information, because we actually presented this information on July 16th. So 2 weeks ago, we had another roundtable where we were able to share the findings. So today we're just kind of briefly going through some of those highlights, but we do have PDF, a recording, and further information and upcoming visual summary from that discussion and from that knowledge exchange. So very briefly, I want to share with you a little bit about our project, Building Leadership Capacity to Address Gender-Based Violence Against Non-Status Refugee and Immigrant Women. This is a project that really comes out of decades of community-based advocacy work, modeled after the Rights of Non-Status Women Network and initiatives based in capacity building towards survivor-centered initiatives by and for non-status refugee and immigrant women, with a focus on gender-based violence in the immigrant and refugee serving sector, modeled after Ocasie's Peer Champion campaign. So the idea for this project is to develop the leadership capacity of NSRI women, non-status refugee and immigrant women, combining two promising practices. The Peer Champion program, which the Peer Champion program uses popular education to build leadership capacity and foster connections between non-status refugee immigrant women, and the Community Advocacy Network, which is a strategy involving and working with grassroots networks among non-status refugee and immigrant survivors, service providers, and other civil society leaders in order to build community capacity for developing survivor-led solutions to gender-based violence. So if you're scratching your head and you're saying, okay, well, the two promising practices that we mentioned, they're modeled after actually practices that are underway, well underway here in Toronto. The first being, the first promising practice that it's modeled after is the Rights of Non-Status Women Network. And I'm not going to say too much because we're really delighted that there's members of the network today that are joining the call and that will be able to share further. But the Rights of Non-Status Women Network for over 14 years has been a grassroots network of service provider and activists, and they've been gathering together to strategize around how to best support women with precarious status and to deal with multiple forms of violence in their lives. The Rights of Non-Status Women Network uses a community-based model to be more responsive to gaps in supports of NSRI women, as well to develop a shared analysis of policies affecting NSRI communities. Each year, the network organizes 2 educational forums for service providers on such issues such as housing, mental health, sanctuary city policies, detention and deportation, and impacts of immigration law and policy for NSRI women and their families. The networks really focus on grassroots advocacy and builds capacity for developing a diversity of solutions that are not constrained by more traditional service user models. I'm not going to say too much more, but you will hear further from the group from the Rights of Non-Status Women Network during this call. Mira? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm mute again. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everybody. So as Margarita mentioned it, we also have this peer champion model. And the peer champion model is mirrored after the IRC NFF campaigns. So it's immigrant, refugees, communities, neighbors, friends, and families, which is the aim of the campaign is to build community-based responses to address gender-based violence among immigrant, refugees, and communities. The campaign creates strong connections with community leaders who have deep and trusted ties with immigrant, refugees, and organizations serving those individuals and their communities. The peer champions are trained to identify and support newcomer women experiencing violence and to educate their communities about the effects of violence against women among immigrant and refugee communities. On the next slide, you're going to see just a little bit of the flyers and about the events that peer champions organized across Ontario last year. So this is a small sample of some of the events created during the 2019-2020 peer champion cohort. Every year we recruit around 15 peer champions, and they're trained and selected across Ontario. Peer champions have the freedom to create and deliver their community educational events in whatever form or way that fits the needs of their communities. Peer champions deliver community events in faith spaces, student unions, neighborhood groups, and in the workplace, or in what we have identified as entry points, so language schools, food banks, and drop-in centers. Margarita?
Great, thank you, Mira. Thanks. So just very briefly, so those are two of the promising practices that we're modeled after that are well underway. But another part of this project was thinking about, that's some of the work that's happening in Toronto, but also we wanted to know about the local realities in the other regions in which we're planning to implement and to further develop these promising practices. So we wanted to learn more about what was happening in Ottawa, in Vancouver, in Edmonton, and Fredericton. So in part of designing this project in the stages that we were at, part of our objective was to kind of test our assumptions or ideas around, is community advocacy work, what does it look like in those regions, right? What does a survivor-led model look like also in those regions? So not only to test these kinds of ideas that we had, but also it was a part of the work that we were doing and the opportunity to really meet people, to build relationships. So what we collect was providing us with a baseline for how we can kind of measure and think about how to adapt these programs or how to implement them in each of these regions. So what you're seeing here on the screen is really just a sneak peek of the cover of our research report and the research that we conducted over the last year, where we really highlight this research journey across the different regions. So in terms of the research, just very quickly, we did conduct an environmental scan and a needs assessment. And our scan started with a review of what currently exists in terms of information, 200 reports, policy papers, academic articles, and materials from grassroots relating to gender-based violence against non-status refugee and immigrant women. And our research team also visited community organizations and spaces in each of the regions we traveled to, including, checking out the libraries, drop-in centers, spending time in the neighborhoods to really observe and understand the local context. And also with this, also a very important part of this process was conducting stakeholder consultations with over 76 service providers and community advocates across the different regions. So this is just giving you an example of the kind of questions that we were asking. We had some mapping and reflection activities to understand, what currently exists in the region in terms of survivor-led or survivor-centered groups and community-based advocacy. And to learn about what are some of the challenges and what are some of the ways in which the work is being done in the regions. Mira?
Perfect. Thank you, Margarita. So then the second part was the needs assessment. So what did we learn from NSRI women across the regions? So for the needs assessment, we conducted focus group and interviews with 49 non-status refugee and immigrant women, whom we recruit through our partner organizations and the stakeholders whom we consulted. We use participatory, community-based, and trauma-informed approach in designing the focus group. For example, we pilot our questions with a group of non-status refugee and immigrant women who were survivors or who provided critical feedback. We also created a webinar for our community partners on how to conduct participatory research with non-status refugee and immigrant women, so that we weren't just doing research, but we were teaching the frontline workers of those organizations how to conduct research.
Great, thank you, Mira. Okay, so there is a lot of information we're trying to share. Again, I'm just going to repeat that for those of you who are joining us, we're just doing a quick overview of some of our project background and some of the research that we conducted last year. We did host a roundtable where you'll be able to access this information and also see a visual summary. This is just a quick kind of overview. And as we mentioned, a big part of this project is to see and to adapt the promising practices, to think about how these promising practices can unfold in the different regions in which we are partnered. So part of that also means in thinking about this research is how the research informs the ways in which we are adapting the training material or any information related to the promising practices. So this is what we identify as this blueprint, a blueprint in progress. And a blueprint is actually the terminology from the funder and is part of this project being 5 years in length, where we think about a blueprint as a practical how-to resource that provides and outlines the promising practice and how it can be replicated by other organizations and adapted to their local context. So all organizations that are actually receiving this funding under the call through wage are required to develop this type of blueprint based on testing their promising practices. So, for example, when we went out and conducted community stakeholder consultations, we heard about the amazing type of work that is happening in all of the different regions. We learned about the different channels of the ways in which advocacy, community-based advocacy work is taking place. It can be planning tables and national councils, working groups, committees, boards, different umbrella groups. This is what we highlighted in our research report, which you can access once it's available, but also we reviewed in the last roundtable. Just highlights a different kind of typology, the different ways that people are doing advocacy across the regions. But we also learned about some of those systemic challenges, the systemic barriers to doing advocacy work. Through our conversations with stakeholders, we kind of heard about this advocacy chill on the work with doing advocacy with non-status refugee and immigrant women. So that means there's kind of fear of losing funding, being muted, silenced, and also partaking in advocacy work just looks different if you're a service provider, if you're a community organizer, if you're an organizational leader. We also heard service providers sharing with us about all the different systems that they're navigating. So if we think about all those systems, and we can just imagine that, we've got the immigration system, housing system, healthcare, child welfare, there's many systems in which we learn that service providers are navigating. And when we think of non-status refugee and immigrant women that they're aiming to support, we also have to think about this holistically. So people's needs are intersectional. So advocates and service providers are very much tasked and burdened with navigating so many of these different systems. And at the same time, we think about what happens when people are navigating all of these systems and taking a lot of this work on at this kind of individual as a service provider level, is we heard that there's exhaustion. The topic of capacity came up, and an expression that we heard often was, I'm doing a lot of this off the side of my desk. So this is kind of this work that's happening at this individual. There might be someone at the agency who knows, who has the ins, who's connected, who's doing the work, but it felt like extra work for different individuals. And so it's already kind of this burden, marginalized sector, and this kind of accelerated this need to also deal with immediate needs, but also larger kind of systemic needs. So again, very briefly, we're saying that information we hear about the challenges, that is intended to inform our blueprint. When we think out loud about this community advocacy network, we're thinking, okay, how do we further support capacity? How do we navigate collectively some of these systemic barriers to advocacy work? What happens when we navigate these multiple systems, not just in isolation or carried out by individual service providers, but done collaboratively, working together, redistributing some of this navigation work? And then thinking about that capacity piece also is that the capacity can come from the community, from the non-VAW sector, and from other immigrant and refugee sectors. So initiatives that are originating both bottom up from community leaders as well as top down. So thinking about that redistribution. And bridging is an important part as well. So creating equitable opportunities for non-status and refugee immigrant women to participate.
Thank you, Margarita. So the highlights from our conversations with non-status and refugee and immigrant women. So we set on a journey to hear from NSRI women and their impressions of the terms safety, healing, and leadership that are central to our project, and what it means to be a survivor. Were they comfortable with the mainstream definitions? And more importantly, what were their own definitions? How did their experiences and perspective challenge our assumptions about what a survival-led project might look like? Non-status refugee and immigrant women challenged the assumptions of survivor, migrant women, and leader. They introduced us to the ideas of community forms of healing and promoting safety. They also talk about promoting neutral places to access services and creating safe spaces to build community. For the blueprint, what does it mean, all of that, for a blueprint at a national level that is inclusive of non-status refugee and immigrant women? So for us, a blueprint like that, it includes having non-status refugee and immigrant women having a central part of the creation and delivery of programs. It avoids framing survivorship as a one-time static event or label. Instead, consider surviving is an ongoing process, not limited to one source of oppression. It challenges ideas about safety and healing as only individual. They told us about collective safety, collective healing from what about collective healing for structural harms? What about including spaces where non-status refugee and immigrant women are already participating? Create capacity for healing outside of survival label. Are there neutral places where humanity can be restored, spaces of joy, community, and shared healing? Those are some of the points where I will blueprint in progress.
Great, thank you, Mira. We're going to now, so again, that information is emphasized in our previous recording, and we're happy to share that information. You can also access it in on our website. So next, we're going to now jump right into our roundtable discussion, and we are delighted to have, we don't want to take too much time, focusing on the project background and the overview. So we want to welcome our speakers back. Yasmin and I will be co-moderating this part of the roundtable. And so what we've done is we have 3 different questions for each of the speakers. And we are also going to have the participation of the members of the Rights of Non-Status Women Network, and also a non-status refugee and immigrant women who participated in our earlier conversations here in Toronto. So that they'll be joining us in the second half of the roundtable, where we're focused a little bit more on COVID-19. So Yasmin, if you'd like, maybe we can first start by introducing our speakers.
Oh, certainly, yes, of course. So we will be having 3 speakers join us today. The first is Lolly Rico, the co-director of the FCJ Refugee Center. Second, Fatima Philippi, executive director of the Rexdale Women's Center. And third, Deepa Matu, who's the executive director of the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. Just to let everyone know, Deepa will be joining us a little bit later on in the discussion around 3 o'clock. So we will be beginning the roundtable by addressing the first 2 questions to Lolly and Fatima, and then make a little bit of a jump to include Deepa into the discussion. So if we're ready, we'll jump right into the questions.
Great.
All right. First question is for you, Lolly. What are ways in which you practice community-based advocacy work to address gender-based violence against NSRI women in Toronto? And part 2, what makes this type of work and approach unique to addressing gender-based violence against NSRI women in Toronto?
Thank you, Jasmine and Margarita and Okasi, for all the work that you are doing. One of and it's really, I'm excited to be here, even I'm on holidays, but I say I wanna be there because it's something that in my 30 years living in Canada and 29 working in this sector, finally is something that we are discussing very focused on how it's coming from the perspective of the people that who really suffer violence, but also where you include everyone, not just refugee and immigrant women, but also women without status, which is for me is really is an excellent approach. With that short summary, at the FCJ, what we have is a holistic approach that we always have been saying that we have our holistic model. That means is when the person comes, the first thing is to be informed. And also with that information, they need to make a choice. Because one of the elements that women that have been in gender violence, the first thing that they lose is their choice. Someone is controlling them. And at the moment that they have that information, they can start doing their own steps. One of the things that we have been doing is that as people who doesn't know what we do, is that we help them if they are without status, because most of our a population and clientele that we have as a woman is people without status, is to provide a safe place, a safe environment. We have a small housing program where they can stay in our houses until they feel comfortable to move on the community. The second is to help them how to address what they want to choose, especially when it's with the immigration process. And the third is to see what services are available. As we see, one of the problems and that we try to address is the accessibility with the services. And for us, what is community-based advocacy is to really have, is a client center, but also at the same time is that the clients can take all the tools that we can provide as a service provider and they can make their choices. That's one of that's how we do the approach. The other is that also as an organization, it's not that you can do everything in the organization. One of the elements, for example, we have been trying to fill up the gaps of needs as an organization and also working in a collaborative with other agencies. We work very close with Barbara Slifer. We refer to Rexdale Women's Center. We refer to Working Women's Center. We refer to all the different agencies where is the need. The challenges that when we do that referral is the eligibility, because most of our population is non-status and is something that we need to advocate. The other element that when we talk about advocacy is how to prevent, because most of the women, when they come out from the violence, one of the main thing that we hear is the fear of deportation, because they are in a breakdown in sponsorship. And I can say that is a mix of the challenges, but also we have been having with this advocacy work, when you bring the issues up from to all the level of government, we have been successful. And one of the, we can say very proud, and that we take it is the pilot project that it is right now. It's not the perfect, but the pilot project to have a humanitarian compassion grounds with temporary resident permit for women who have been suffering violence. And that's something that we do. What is the second question, how this work is unique on the addressing is, as I say, client center. We have everything in our organization. Even we have access to health, that even though now with COVID-19 in the province of Ontario, everyone has access to health without, no matter what is their immigration status, but we have a primary care clinic where the woman can come and they can be seen by doctors, and it's a free of charge. How also, that's something that we do, the uniqueness is because it's in-house a little bit, and also it's in-house what we try to keep our organization as a grassroots. The other uniqueness is that many of the women that have been in our houses, or many of the clients that have been coming with us, have been also given the opportunity of participating in our organization from the head to the working with us. And if you see in our staff and in our also even board members, we have people who have been survivors of violence, or they have been in an experience either as a refugee or immigrant, or women that have been in non-status and for now they can work. And that's, I think that's something that we can be proud that what we are doing at the FCJ. I'm quiet.
Thank you, Loli. Thank you. I just have a question just to quickly follow up. For those people who might not be so familiar with the FCJ Refugee Center, when you're mentioning even in terms of health care and the kind of primary care that's available, or what you just mentioned as well of having housing available, those things, it's a very much a holistic space. Like, how would you describe that? For example, if people are not from Toronto and are listening in, could you share that further?
Well, what we do is that you call. Right now we are seeing remotely, but we have access to people who have a need. For example, a woman who is in need of housing, they need to call our organization. And we have, one of the things that we just started this year is that we have a WhatsApp number, because many of the women, they have been here less than a year and they still have because access, and it's so expensive to have a cell phone and to communicate, or even they have this new app that you can have a Canadian number, but it's more difficult. They can connect with us in our WhatsApp. And our website is the fcjrefugeecenter.org. And also you can see what is all our programs. One of the things we have in leadership of our organization, an FCJ Youth Network, where the leadership is coming from there. Like we have the experience in our organization, what is the peer model, because the youth, they not just come for services, they decide what they want to do, what is the services, what they need, and we work on that. And one of clear example of that is the access to education, because we were working together advocating with York University to have access to the post-secondary education, and now there is a bridging program in York for people without status, specifically that they can go to York University and do payments on domestic fees, not treated as international students, and to have a triple of tuition.
Wow, that's incredible. So people can learn more about some of that advocacy work that came out of the youth network online as well.
Yes.
Wow.
Fantastic. And they connect now online once a week.
Right, right. Thank you, Loli. I'll let Yasmin take over.
All right, next question is for Fatima. Same question. What are ways in which you practice community-based advocacy, work to address gender-based violence against non-status refugee and immigrant women in Toronto? And what makes this type of work and approach unique to addressing gender-based violence against those same NSRI women?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really happy to be a part of this panel conversation. I mean, the work that we do at the Rexall Center, focuses very heavily on violence against women and gender-based violence, and the work that we're doing with all women, status, non-status, all of that is certainly something we've been doing since 1978. It's one of the major programs that we focus on in our community. And I have to say thank you for choosing the right photo, because I don't know if that looks anything like me now today, but okay, we'll go with that. So all my friends and colleagues out there, hey, shout out to you. I think much like Loli, the work that we do is holistic. It's from the ground up. It's not one avenue or not another avenue. I think for us, advocacy, because as I said, something we do on the side of the table, but I'm trying to turn that into something else and make it more organizational, making it part of the life of the organization. And part of it starts with even educating our clients about not only gender-based violence, but what is advocacy? What does that look like? And advocacy in many, some of my colleagues are here who have been in the sector as long as I have, those were words you couldn't use with government at some point. You couldn't use lobbying, you couldn't use advocacy. And so we had to change that perspective and say, what are we trying to achieve with that? And so it's really about education and looking at, and perhaps coming up with recommendations for alternatives to addressing the issues that our clients are focusing it and turning it back as to a client issue and a community issue, not as an organization influencing government. So we've had to play that side, the different sides of the fence, depending on what's been going on in government. And certainly there's a lot of understanding. We do a lot of work with connecting with women, understanding what it is that they're going through, what they're experiencing. And what we've learned over the years is that no one woman is homogenized. We deal with a lot of South Asian women. They're not all the same. Everybody's going to experience something different, and we really have to bring that to the table, and we have to understand that. And not all women are going to approach their situation in the same way. And some women are really quite capable of sometimes even doing their own advocacy and speaking out and talking at forums. We invite women to come and speak on their situation, how they overcame the system, and being somewhat ambassadors or role models, and helping them to make it not an organizational issue, but a woman empowerment issue. And that's how, and what we do there. There's a lot of work that we do, even on the side of the table. There's lots of networks. I think, local immigration partnerships across Canada have played an important role in looking at addressing issues that are, newcomers, refugees. You can throw in refugee women, and sometimes we do, because as we know, some refugee women will obtain status. And so it's not to say that refugee women who are with non-status are not experiencing the same issues as a refugee woman who's been accepted in Canada by the government, although the approach for service delivery and service access are very different. And so, there is that. And I'm not sure if many of you are aware, we've started a women's caucus at the OCASI, and I'm really very proud of the women members of OCASI who supported us on this initiative and moving this forward and bringing a collective voice to the table and looking at a collective way to address advocacy in a way that is going to be allowed by our funders and sometimes dictated by our bylaws and the Corporations Act and our Charitable Registration Act. So we have to be concerned with those elements when we're looking at how we're doing advocacy. And I've started to turn it in and talk about really education and helping and making more about promoting and making ways and creating ways and avenues in which we promote the needs of women regardless of status here in the community. I think one of the things that I found over the years, and I've been involved in this sector since 1982, is the fact that we have any kind of local, provincial, or national organizing groups that addresses women's issues. We used to have NOIMBN years and years ago. Loli, I don't know if you remember that. That disappeared when governments came in and destroyed it. And so what exists now are government-led initiatives. But the problem with government-led initiatives is that you have to be invited to the table. And so we try to figure out, how to sneak into these tables or how to filter our way into these tables. If we're not invited to the table, we provide data to the people sitting at the table. One of the things that I've learned from a frontline perspective is data is important, and we can't minimize the way in which we collect data, evaluate it, and synthesize it. I mean, you've talked about that, Margarita, and it really is important because it is key to understanding the scope of the issue in your own organization and in the community, but how that fits into the bigger picture. So we often feed this information to people we know who are sitting at the table, and they can bring those issues to the table. And sometimes it also means meeting with our local representatives to talk about these tables, get them informed, and saying, this is going on, what's happening there? And how can we provide you with information so that you can understand the whole scope of the issues that all the women that we're seeing are facing as part of, gender-based violence and SRI women, so I think that's really important to us. As an organization, it's certainly part and parcel with our policy and the work that we're doing. It's part of our strategic plan. We don't let that go. Certainly collecting data and interpreting data and having clients have a voice. I used to hate it when my funders used to ask me, can you get a client to give a testimonial? And, I thought, we're putting our clients on, it's like a, dog and pony show. Here we are showcasing them. But what I've learned from that is within the context of things that they were experiencing, it helps me to understand the barriers that they faced and how they overcame them, and then identifying, are there pathways in which we can identify that we can present this to other women and say, here are some examples. And sometimes it really works and it resonates. It resonates with our funders because, again, it goes back to who we are serving. It's not about the organization, but to the clients that we are serving. And what's unique about us, is, again, it's not one way or no way, it's an intersectionality with all the areas and avenues that we can possibly get ourselves into. Sorry, I have a bit of a sore throat today. No, it's not COVID. I've been on endless phone calls today, so I'm hoping, I apologize for that. But I think, as again, what we said, we tend to view advocacy as something that we want to leave to someone else because we don't have the time. The fact that it is under-resourced, and we are already under-resourced across all organizations. And, even some of my staff say, oh, I don't do advocacy, but I say, yes, we do. And here's how you are advocating from a frontline perspective, and it's really understanding what that is. Advocacy to me is about accessibility and talking to my staff and saying to them, when your client is denied, let's say, housing application, they're now denied housing, you are advocating on their behalf to say, here's what was missed and so on, and making those referrals to the community legal clinic or where else we need to make those referrals to. And that's really important. So I think, really understanding, this is how we work as an organization, understanding our role and relationship and advocating for the needs of women, and looking at not advocating for the needs of the organization, but advocating for the needs of the women and how we fit in. And definitely partnerships partnerships is really something that we cannot do without. Not only, you know, frontline service partnerships. I mean, all the women here at the table, we worked with over the many years, and, you know, inter-referrals back and forth are really critical. But it's also, you know, we need to start taking the time to understand from the client perspective that navigation problem. And that's something we started to do more of within the last 15 to 20 years. You know, again, it was from our understanding of what we saw as being issues that women were facing. And quite frankly, it was not what they were telling us. And really, you know, and incorporating that into how we work as an organization. And it's challenging, which is not to say that, you know, we're achieving this 100%. You know, I think, but if we look back and look at all the institutional changes that have come about as that, I think we'd be surprised. We often take for granted that we have made many inroads. Loli, you mentioned that. I mean, you know, gee, you know, not charging women, you know, foreign fees for education was critical. And I think sometimes we don't celebrate enough of the wins, and we don't document enough of the wins in order to see, and we don't take time to learn what process we had to take to get to those wins. And so I think, you know, I'm not saying because we're negligent. It's the fact is time is always an issue here, and not having those resources to do it, but doing the best that we can. And one of the last things I want to focus on is the transmission of history to the newer generation. I think newer staff, when we talk about why do we do it this way, you know, so really focusing on that and really creating that kind of climate and atmosphere within the organization to talk about the institutional history involvement in this work, and how as a sector we've done this work. So that's really important to me, to keeping that alive. That's it.
That's so great. Thank you, Fatima. And I really liked also the way you made that distinction. You're saying, you know, on the side of the desk, off the side of the desk. And it was really remarkable to hear the history, as you say, like to hear that history, to hear the way that that it's not new. And also, I think what was really helpful for people listening is also the language, as you mentioned, what kind of going deeper into this is advocacy. You are doing advocacy work. I think that's really helpful. Something we also learn in our research, because what we might be naming here, advocacy or this kind of network, has different language or different ways that it's being referred to in other regions. So kind of understanding these different expressions and different manifestations of it.
And agencies have to be very conscious of who they're speaking to when they use those terminologies. There are some people you can use the word advocacy with and have no problems at all. And there are other governments or other levels of government where you can just say, let's not use that word. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about, you know, policy restrictions and how that impacts client services. So I think, you know, it's turning that in that language in that way, but really knowing it, but and knowing who you can use that term with and who you can't. And that's really part of the work, and being very careful about it. You know, do I want to put the word advocacy on my website? Maybe not. You know, I might want to put promotion and education and policy and social change. Sure, for sure.
Yeah, I see Lolly nodding.
Yeah, but also going in the direction that Fatima was saying is that sometimes also we use the umbrella organizations when we need really to do the advocacy. For example, in the provincially here in Ontario, we have OCASI. Yeah. And I remember when I started working in OCASI, we were talking about about immigrant women. Then we start bringing the knowledge and the word about refugee women. And now we are talking, hey, non-status woman. I haven't heard that before, even when I was president of OCASI. And in that case, it's the movement of our advocacy also is not just to the government, it's also to do advocacy among ourselves, to understand the challenges, that the difference between how immigration put you the levels, that's how you have access to successful or access to even services. And that's something that we need to recognize and use organizations like nationally, like the Canadian Council for Refugees, that they can advocate, and that you cannot do it because you are just a simple charitable organization. But if you are a whole group, you can move something. And that's we can celebrate. I'm totally agree with Fatima that we are shy still in our sector to celebrate our successful, not just the access to education,
No.
but for example, the pilot project is
Yeah.
this is based on our advocacy, and we need to do the celebration. Selena was asking what is the new early initiative. We don't have what is our her story from our sector. That's
Mhm.
something that we need to start seeing nationally, because we need to recognize that we
Mhm.
can do, we can shake it, the country.
You know, I think if we look back, for example, when we had in the early 1990s or 95, 96, a Harper government, when they introduced that 2-year moratorium for women who were coming, being sponsored to Canada and to stay in relationships for 2 years in order before they were able to get their landed status. And there was a huge uproar and saying, are you telling us that women should stay in abusive relationships? Is that what you're putting women's lives at risk? And quickly identifying the data, doing the work nationally and backpedaling. And then, you know, getting a directive change saying, oh yes, with the exception that if there is a documented history of domestic violence, that women wouldn't have to meet that 2-year requirement. I mean, those are huge wins. And we just take that for granted. Oh, we just, that was a huge win within a government that wasn't necessarily open to that concept. And so I think, when we look at those examples and when we turn it to a client perspective, I think we make a lot of greater, they say, oh, you're just a whining, nonprofit organization trying to get additional funding. It's not about that. And it really looking at speaking it from that client perspective that makes that change and makes it possible to happen. So it's not to say it can't happen, and to take those wins when we get them.
Thank you so much. And this is, as you say, that narrative around this work and celebrating is so important.
Oh, yeah.
That the significance of it. And we're really happy that you're sharing a lot of this right now here. Yasmin, I've been thinking maybe we could carry on to the next question, because some people were kind of talking about the challenges. And then once Deepa is ready to join us, she can maybe respond to those questions. How does that sound?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. So let's move on. All right.
Hey.
Back to Lolly. Based on your experience, what are some of the challenges in doing community-based advocacy work?
One of the main challenges, especially for the non-status woman, is the fear of deportation. And in that case, one of the main challenges is also how to break down through the system in a way that you can continue doing the community-based advocacy. But also the other is that to start recognizing and to identify what that means when we talk about precarious migration or when we talk about non-status women, because still there is a baggage of discrimination and prejudice against them, even though they have been suffering violence, and it's in the whole system of protection for women. When you call for a shelter, when you call for housing, when you call, when you look all the services that immigrant women has or refugee women has, and how you can advocate for them, you face a big challenge, and is the prejudice among what is precarious migration. And that's something that we need to keep working on that, and not just in our sector, but also when you are doing with all the levels of government. For example, Toronto, we are a sanctuary city. And I put it like this in quotation because it's true. When you call 911, the police come and look for a protection for you, but then they report to CBSA. And in that case, it's a fear for the woman that how they will be their life moving forward. But also the other is that in the service provider sector that they are used to, because we have an eligibility criteria that we need to break on that they are used to serve one population. When they come, is no understanding what are the challenges, why they didn't leave the situation, to understand that the cycle of violence, that when you don't have a status is worse, to break that cycle. And also to be aware that you have different situations. And I like the idea that when Fatima was mentioning before, every woman is different situation. don't put it in the same bag. And that's when you, at the beginning, I didn't understand when you were saying NSRI. No, let's name it what is, because the three sectors of women that we are talking, we have different challenges and different situations. And that's something that we need to base. For us as an organization, one of our main challenges is when we talk about non-status women at the level of government, there is a clear shutdown. But when you start talking what is precarious migrants and you start playing around, well, you can get more resources. But the main challenge that we have historically is the access to services for them, no matter what is their status. Because there are women that they are suffering violence, that they don't have access to housing because they don't have a status. They don't have access to social services because they don't have a status. They don't have access even to education because they don't have a status, which that means limit our clients to really move forward from their situation.
Thank you, Loli, and such important points that you mentioned, because, you know, even the acronym, I think, like you said, it's important to even to name it so that it doesn't collapse all of those realities and experiences, and making sure we're identifying those differences. You know, the shared, some shared, but also the importance to kind of highlight some of those differences.
All
Okay.
right.
So it comes back to me, and I think I've touched a little bit on it already. I think it's, you know, one of the things that I have to share this with the group. I was at a consultation and I heard that, you know, solving societal issues is not a government problem. You know, the government cannot be responsible for solving all societal issues. And I said, nor can it continue to perpetuate it. So it has some level of responsibility within each government department and address and how it's going to be addressed. So, you know, I was surprised even to hear that kind of statement being made. But, you know, so I think sometimes we need to put it into the context of where that's coming from within the government bureaucracy, understanding where the challenges fit within that government bureaucracy, where that lies, and the flexibility with some levels of government have more and some have less, and helping to understand that other funders have a large degree of flexibility. You know, for example, we have United Way here in the City of Toronto, which really does fill in the gap, what we call it, for where other funders have limitations in order to be able to address, you know, status. Can they access services based on status? And so, you know, I think those are the things that we as a sector need to understand, and who we're presenting that work to. It doesn't say you don't tell them, but you're not going to be chatting them up all the time, because within their own government parameters and scope of capacity, it's not going to, you know, it's like talking on deaf ears, you know, forget it. Don't waste your time there. So I think half the time is understanding that battle for us. Surely under-resourcing, lack of staff resources, and the strategy. I'm so impressed. I have to shout out to our YWCA in Toronto. They have, you know, a research team, and that's a, you know, how can we leverage that? How can we use that data in our work locally? If they are able to staff it and able to resource it and able to get it, how can we share that data and how can we use that? And I think that's really important. And relying on really sector information. It's nice when we get those government reports and we get the national strategy on the, you know, violence, you know, on violence against women, gender-based violence. Yeah, you know, I rather look at what's happening in the sector and how we can use that locally and how that might apply to my organization. You know, I think first and foremost, one of the things that I've learned over the years is the challenge with and you know, and even the chill related to advocacy is really based on who's in power. You know, we've seen governments over the years, you know, I've seen governments come and go, and knowing who's more receptive and who isn't based on their strategies when they're talking about it out there, when they're campaigning, and seeing their policies, and knowing who you can address. I think, you know, we saw this, and the United Way had a session on this just last year. I don't know, Deepa, you were there with me. Dear, I just saw Deepa join in. A chill happened when we had a changeover in the provincial government. And we knew that we were moving away from more liberal to a more conservative government, and where that meant and where the strategy was going to go and how we're going to be perceived in terms of our work with advocacy. And yes, a lot of us took a step back. Some, kept our heads down and did our work because we don't want to be targeted for defunding. And that's a big fear. Absolutely is a big fear with organizations. And, those of us who are registered charities, we have the fear of the government. Oversight in terms of the scope of the work we're doing in terms of advocacy and lobbying. Do we need to register as lobbyists when we're writing our local counselor about the challenges that our clients are facing? So really understanding that relationship is really important in regards to governments who are in power, and then also with regards to legislation for nonprofits and for registered charities. So we need to be careful, and it's becoming, the degree of responsibility is no longer on government, but on organizations to do that. You can't say, I didn't know that anymore. It doesn't work. And so we've seen some charities fall into situations where they're being audited by the federal government for their charitable work in relation to their advocacy work. So we have to be really careful and understand that, and being aware of that. And how does the board support that work? Nothing could be worse if your board does not support advocacy, and then all of a sudden you're involved in some of this work, and it comes back on you, and you can't have your board members speak on behalf of the organization, and so that becomes the problem. And so I think that in an organizational context is really critical as part of the challenge, the work that we do. Again, as I said, flipping it to education from a client-centered, client-focused perspective, and not necessarily about service funding and looking at that, but how service funding limits client access is good. You can say it that way. And I think, for us, those have been the huge challenges. And as I said, I think, we've made some wins over the years, even in spite of, challenges and the chill that we're experiencing right now. That we're seeing happening because of this whole COVID situation, also, but because of government changes, and I think all of us are thinking, is there an election looming nationally? And what does that mean locally for us on the ground as organization with regards to funding? So the fear of losing funding has been an issue, and we've seen organizations who have lost funding because they've undertaken lobbying. And I know one organization even took the government to court and lost. So yes, this happened here in Toronto, and we have to be really, really careful with that. And so again, we really have to have a strategy in place that's going to be measured against capacity, board support, and community support with other networks and other organizations that can do a lot more lobbying on our behalf.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you. And just the way that you were able to kind of walk us through all of the different kind of strategies that are necessary. And also, I feel like here comes that piece that Loli mentioned as well, like the importance of umbrella groups, that how they have been so important in the sector as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And I know that Deepa joined us. So Yasmin, I'll let you take over if you want to introduce Deepa, and then she can also join our conversation.
Absolutely. So at this point, we want to introduce our third speaker, Deepa Matu from the Barbara Schleifer Clinic, where she is Executive Director. Thank you for joining us, Deepa. So we're going to be addressing those same questions that we had put to our other two speakers, starting with, what are ways in which you practice community-based advocacy work to address gender-based violence against non-status refugee and immigrant women in Toronto? And part two to that question, what makes this type of work and approach unique to addressing gender-based violence against those same non-status refugee and immigrant women?
Sure. So the way I have organized my notes is that I would try to speak to the questions in a merged way. I hope that works for everyone. And I first of all, I want to thank Ocasi for organizing this. Yet again, a fabulous space for connecting with amazing advocates out there. A lot of people who I have immense respect for. I look up to their work all the time. I've learned from working with them, such as Loli Rico. I have great admiration for her work. We both also share something in common. We both are Spirit of Barbara Schleifer award winners in different years. So there's a sisterhood by a bracelet in our case. And Fatima, with whom I sit on the Ocasi's Women Caucus, and I learn every day, where Fatima is the chair of the caucus. In terms of how do we practice community-based advocacy and what makes this type of work unique in addressing GBV, my location is slightly unique, which we all have unique locations, because I enter this space and the work from an organization which is multi-service in nature. So we have a legal clinic aspect to the clinic, and we have counseling services, and we have interpretation services, which are actually delivered by immigrant women themselves. So those 200 languages in which we provide interpretation, those services are delivered by immigrant women, and they're delivered for immigrant women. So that whole notion of a space for women by women comes really complete in our space in that respect. Because we are a legal clinic and we practice immigration law, and my background has been in the area of immigration law, the advocacy side of legislative challenges related to the immigration and refugee comes very naturally to us. We have always been against them. We will always be against them. That does not change for us. Any immigration and refugee case is always going to be against IRCC for us. So we are naturally their opponents. And I think they have made peace with us, and we have made peace with us with our respective roles. Saying that, do we cross paths with them sometimes as our funder, sometimes as our supporter, sometimes coming to us to ask for our expertise? Absolutely, yes, we do. How does that make an approach unique is because while they know that we will always be in opposition against their decision making when it comes to our clients, and we will always be advocating for our clients' well-being, they also know that because of that relationship, we have a neutral space when it comes to giving them advice on any policy and legislative decision making. So they value that, and they also value the fact that we are very strong on our position. We are not going to change. We are always going to call them out when they make any legal change or any policy change which is against the well-being of the women or marginalized community. So they know that, and we are always there, and that's our unique approach to the work, that we don't have to collaborate with them in any respect. I know that that's a very unique position. I know that a lot of my sister agencies, which are funded by them, and they have a very different role of they becoming their funder then, have a very unique challenge. That sense of scarcity which comes with the funding issue is so unique. And I face that with some 20 odd funders that fund the my organization. So it's not that I don't know what that feels like when you have a inherent power imbalance with someone who is your funder, but yet also a decision maker on your client's life. Basically, they can change their life with their stroke of one pen, right? So I know that that challenge of them being the decision makers as well as the funders sometimes can really make it complicated to vehemently always oppose them. So in my notes, when I looked at, and the reason my notes are merged is because I was looking at your follow-up questions around the advocacy chill, and thinking about COVID-19 and its impact. What I have been doing in my work individually, as well as, as the leader of the clinic, what the clinic's position has been since COVID-19 started, we have been at the front lines of talking about the impact of COVID-19 on gender-based violence, and then being very vocal about, even in the spaces which are not necessarily aware of non-status women issues, not really aware of immigrant women's issues, I have made it a point that I absolutely include that for those spaces for whom this might be a new conversation, for who might not be traditionally an immigrant serving community. So that so making sure that your advocacy is not parceled out, and you don't necessarily look at the issue of non-status and immigrant and refugee women different from racialized women, or different from access to justice issue, or different from racial justice issue. I think that parceling out sometimes that for right or the wrong reasons happens. I personally have experienced from my perspective not to do that. and making sure that we actually talk about those, while the focus should be on the point in order, which if we are talking about Black women, that's point in order and we should focus on it. If you're talking about refugee and non-status women, they're point in order, we should focus on that. But making sure that we realize that a lot of challenges and discriminations which communities are facing are very parallel to each other. These experiences have a lot of common element, and there's a strong philosophy of intersectionality that is attached to these experiences, and we always keep that as our focal point. And why is that important is because if you keep that as your focal point, then you will be making sure that you're not leaving anyone behind. And that leaving anyone behind is the problem. The problem is that when we start focusing on, I'm an access to justice advocate today, and I'm going to talk about feminism today. That's not, there is, for me, no feminism exists without intersectionality, and no feminism exists without access to justice and racial justice. And that could be, again, going back to my privilege of the space that I come from, coming back to the privilege that I have in my my role of my being a lawyer before and now being an executive director of an intersectional based service delivery model. I do acknowledge that. But it's also a philosophy, I think, which can be adapted to the advocacy work. That when I stand up and advocate for my community, I make sure that I don't leave anyone behind in that, because if I am not part of that community, that does not mean that I don't have something similar in my experience that I can relate to, and I can understand why is that other community suffering. So I'm not trying to say co-opt people's struggles, but don't necessarily hesitate to speak to the common elements of the struggle. So that's one thing that I would say definitely has worked for me, and that's definitely that I have been focusing on since COVID-19 started. And just to share with you all that the stats are in our favor when it comes to gender-based violence in a very sad way, that there is data out there which is telling us that there is a 30% increase in the rates of GBV since COVID-19 started. There is data out there which is saying that the indigenous women are actually experiencing more physical and psychological violence out there. So connecting with the data that's coming out and making sure that we are part of that, that data creation, and making sure that the higher rates of poverty, poor housing condition, overcrowding, lack of access to social determinants of health, all of that for the non-status refugee immigrant women is also talked about and included, because a lot of times we won't have that unique data for this particular population. That has been our ongoing struggle for years altogether. So what do you do then? Then what you do is you actually connect to the data that is in existence and make a comparison and say, if this is what is happening to the people with status, just think about what is happening to people without status, and keep the conversation relevant for the population that we want to advocate for. And yeah, that's where I would end for this first question. And I will ask Yasmin to ask me the next one.
Since I feel like you actually, quite broadly described all of the questions that we for you in a beautifully encapsulated way. Thank you for that. I think maybe there's one thing that we can speak to that might not have been spoken to as much, which are, challenges. Are there any unique challenges when, in doing the community-based advocacy work, in our organization?
Yeah, there are unique challenges. One of the unique challenges that we are like many of us, we are a complex mechanism of doing a lot of things at the same time. And during the COVID-19 and this environment, while we were making sure that we were in front of the media cameras, in front of the politicians, and writing to them, actively engaging with them, we also have, we also are an organization, and that organization also needs its own machinery to run. So balancing your operational side of thing and with the advocacy side of thing, that is a challenge that I think most of us face. There is a potential for COVID-19 advocacy fatigue that I would say that a lot of us have been experiencing. The Zoom has its own fatigue. And also sometimes we find that as an organization which traditionally was known to be a mainstream organization, has been perceived as an organization which works with primarily primarily works with white women or Caucasian women, as we say, that has changed over the years, but not necessarily that notion not necessarily in the sector has not changed. So that is another challenge that we continuously kind of work against and try to, so we are relevant in the spaces of racial justice, our relevance in the spaces of working for immigrant women, right? So that's a unique challenge to our space. And I don't, I'm not saying that that's something unique to us. Again, there are lots of other spaces like ours which have had a history of a particular kind of starting point, but they have evolved over the years, and they are at a very different trajectory in their experience as an organization, and I think we are no different. But that's very unique to us. Another unique challenge is that when you know that some of the advocacy work is not necessarily going to have an outcome which you desire, right? So a lot of advocacy work we know is making sure that we keep the government's feet to the fire, we keep the policymakers' feet to the fire, but we are not necessarily going to get the results that we want to see. So then taking those opportunities as a work experience of learning. Me and Yasmin were actually coincidentally talking about a judicial review, I think a couple of days back, and it was like, maybe we will not be successful, but do we take it on? Yes, because if we don't take it on, I don't think there is anyone out there who will take it on. And what would be the experience of that, taking it on knowingly that we might not be successful, but making sure that the woman gets the representation that she deserves. So that has always been an ongoing challenge. Although on that note, I want to share with you, all of you know about this, that that recently, a number of us came together to voice our concerns around what was happening in Nova Scotia around the mass killing that happened, and the government was trying to get away with not doing a public inquiry. And many of us took the time and the courage and the effort to voice our concerns, go out, talk to media, write a letter, and the pressure worked. And I think the pressure worked definitely because the families impacted were right there working beside the feminist organization who were loud and clear on the ask, and we are getting a public inquiry. So sometimes our advocacy efforts do yield results very quickly. I can also share with all of you that I was part of a Ontario Court of Appeal decision recently in a case of a woman who was a refugee claimant in the country who brought her 2 kids with her. And the application judge had decided to remove her kids from the country because from Canada, because her the father of the kids had brought the application here, and the Ontario Court of Appeal reversed that decision. So sometimes our advocacy efforts do yield the results that we seek, and in other situations they don't, and in majority of cases they don't, and that's very discouraging. And we usually then find each other's shoulder to cry on, and also encourage each other. You know what? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. This was one situation. We'll find another one, and keep going the work. I think the work was happening before we arrived, and the work will continue to happen after us. And that's the zeal that you need to keep the work going with.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you so much for your participation. And as you closed off right now saying about the work as well, and I think that ties in with Fatima talking about the narrative and kind of the story of this advocacy work, which I think is important to inform the future work as well. And the next piece actually is we're going to focus a little bit more with the current times, the context of COVID-19. Now let Neera take over. But what you're seeing here, I'll just quickly say that what you're seeing here is a visual summary from our very first roundtable, which actually Deepa, you were a part of, and some of your language is there, that importance of the intersectional, understanding the kind of intersectional impact of COVID-19 and recognizing that this was already a crisis in terms of addressing GBV and some of the issues that were emerging during this time. But I'll let Neera take over as she introduces this next section.
Thank you, Margarita. And I just want to say thank you to Fatima, Loli, and Deepa for such a great conversation. At points, I got goosebumps just remembering, the history, the things, all what has been achieved so far, and the obstacles and everything. It was a great conversation. Thank you. So let's go back to the photo that we see. The illustration, as Margarita mentioned, I created back in April. It's a reflection of, gender-based violence at the national level in a context of COVID-19 and the implications of COVID-19 for women with non-status that are immigrant and refugee women. So if you look at the photo, and this is something that we have said many times before, to understand the current crisis today, we need to understand that this crisis stems from another crisis, because this was already a crisis that we have been fighting for many, many years. And as have you heard what our presenter were saying, it has been a crisis for a long, long time. In Canada, COVID-19 is revealing an architecture of inequality, and those who were already protected before the pandemic have been very impacted, and impacted differently to other communities. COVID-19 has opened the window for necessary political and social change. Violence is up in the front of our nose now. We can't not see it anymore. It was revealed that in our last roundtable, the need to hear from non-status refugee and immigrant women, their experiences and participation in policy and solutions, and meaningful involvement and collaboration. So at this point in the conversation, I want to bring back to the table to Carolina, who participated in an early stage at the early stages of our consultation. Carolina, I hope you are hearing us, Carolina, and that you can unmute yourself. So we have a question for you. Carolina, we want to hear from you about systems and supports that have helped you as an immigrant woman who have experienced gender-based violence during this COVID-19, this pandemic times. What has worked for you? What needs to be improved? And what needs to stay or is critical to have when we move forward, when we move out of this pandemic?
All right, can you ladies hear me properly?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, okay. So firstly, I'm so flattered to be here and talk to you girls, because I understand that if it wasn't for the support that I've got so far from so many people, I wouldn't have made it. Although, sometimes I say like, yeah, I'm on my own, I'm by myself and everything. It's true, but there is a strong support and even network that came from these places that I can never go without mentioning. Firstly, I had my first contact with Barbara Schleifer Clinic a while ago. It was over 2 years ago. And I did it, and the first time wasn't even with Yasmin wasn't there yet. I mean, I didn't see her back then. And that when I first realized some signs that I could be potentially in a kind of dangerous situation. So I started looking for what I could do to basically protect myself and just keep living my life if I was actually in a situation in which I thought I was. And then I ended up meeting Yasmin and everything. She was very much helpful with me. And sometimes I would get to the office very emotional, very difficult to deal with so much going through my head and everything. And she was always very, very helpful and loving and very much, understanding with me, patient, and definitely that was very much of a, life-changing experience for me. And leaving the household when I left my ex-partner and everything, I also didn't have anywhere to go. I was also a non-status woman. And I think that sometimes like abusers might even use that against the women because they sort of know that you are not necessarily covered for every single thing that you need by the state, and they also know that you don't have like family, or you don't know too many people in the city, so you don't have families and friends, like a social network, and think that you're not necessarily going to be like taking care in every single aspect of your life. So it's kind of like you need to stay to survive. But then thankfully I found my way, and I lived in a shelter, which it was the Evangeline, I think it's called, by the Junction. It's a shelter specific for women and everything. It was a tough time because, like, and some ladies mentioned before, like each woman has a different situation. Some of them are citizens, but they are, you know, facing family issues, or, you know, they probably had trouble with the law, whatever. So none of them, not women in the women's shelter, are there because they're non-status or because they're, you know, living in an abusive relationship or anything like that. So you end up facing other challenges in terms of like living together with people facing completely different challenges and, you know, situations. But that was also a crucial moment in my life in which, like, I had the opportunity to participate in some artistic projects within the shelter. We like sort of like barbecue day in the summer, and then we all helped with the party away. But also we did some arts, and, you know, that was, how can I say, eye-opening me, because when I drew something, I'm not for drawing. I don't know how you say draw in the past, but anyway, I did it. I did a woman in a position of like, how can I say, prestige, and she was happy. She was happy, and she was strong and beautiful. So that's sort of like what I saw inside of me, and I wanted to, you know, put it on my paper and everything. So I just kept believing in the image that came out of my own brain. And even though like I had no family here and everything, nobody care of me, places like this shelter, like the Barbershop Life Clinic and the food bank, for example, is something that's very helpful and made me able to, you know, keep going and, you know, just believing in myself, and not, you know, there was a lot of work for me to like come out of this place of like shame, because it's kind of weird to say that, like, you have how can I say, some sort of like limitations when it comes to like reintroducing yourself back into society, because it's always hard to explain that you are a non-status woman, which is like coming out of an abusive relationship, and you're working towards your status. You still don't have a network, you still don't have a like proper cycle of friends and everything, a community of your own. So it's very hard to like explain who you are, like all these things, because even if you try and you go around and you say things like this is what I'm doing, I'm like a artist and I do music, anything, that there will always be the point in which somebody is going to ask you, but here on my student visa, or are you here like a, you know, working visa, are you a tourist? Like they want to know as soon as they realize you're immigrant. Always this moment that, you know, with sort of questions that you're trying to like not focus too much, because that's what necessarily defines you, is just like a status industry. And, you know, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of prejudice around the non-status women and everything, and it's very, very hard to talk about it, very, very hard to put it this way. Nowadays that I'm actually like doing so much better with help of the clinic and everything, I'm basically I have a implied status, like Yasmin was like teaching me the other day and everything when we were working with our my process and everything. Even though I have a very much like normal lifestyle, I work, I have friends now, I'm more involved in like artistic projects and everything. I actually have 3 music projects that I'm working on. And I'm actively a writer. I write for an online magazine here in Canada about music and entertainment and everything. Like, although I have this very like busy lifestyle and everything, every single time the conversation goes back to like, so are you here on a student visa or something? It's always awkward to talk about it. It's always awkward. Like, no matter how much you show that you are, you know, completely capable of taking care of yourself, that the only thing that you actually need is a fair chance. I don't think that non-status women are looking for the state to basically supply us with all that we need as like people. I think that we're looking for a fair chance to get it on our own, basically. Like we just want to have the access of like basically using our energy, our force, and like to support yourself and the people that you love. You're not looking to have the government to sponsor you for your life. You're looking to basically have the fair chance of being introduced in this society as a person, you know, not as an element, not as a like a external element who's been here and now we have to make you fit. It's not that. I'm a person as much as you guys. I care for and I have a different story, but I just need a fair chance. So it's not, you know, being sponsored forever or whatever, being cared forever, babysitted by the system. It's not what we're looking for. Basically, we're just looking for the fair chance to do it in our own. And places like Barbara Schleifer definitely helped me to get it done. Basically, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolina. Margarita, do you want to take it from here?
Thank you so much, Carolina, for sharing with us. And we're delighted we finally get to see you today because as Mira said, we've only had conversations in the past over the phone. So it is really nice to see you and to have your participation, have your voice here today. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you. So next we have a member of the Right of Non-Status Women Network, Selena Abdi, who is gonna talk a little bit about the model and the organization. Selena?
Selena, I think
okay, great.
Sorry,
Thank you. I wasn't able to unmute myself. So I just want to start by just saying thank you to Carolina so much and for sharing your experiences, and the whole notion of a fair chance, I think, is so much about why we do this work as well. And thank you to all of our speakers. Many of you are longtime supporters of our network and founding members of the network. So it's just so great to be here. I'm not going to take up a lot of time. All I wanted to do was just let folks know about a campaign that our Rights of Non-Status Women Network launched way back in April, which feels like such a long time ago. But about a couple of weeks after, you know, all the public health measures were introduced around COVID-19. And, you know, we've been doing this work for a good 15 years now. And we just noticed right away that there really wasn't any attention being paid to the impacts of COVID, as well as public health measures on non-status women in particular. So some of you may, this is a visual from our campaign put together by Aza Avaro, a local artist. And you know, some of you remember the phrase, "We're all in this together," right? It was being said over and over again at the beginning. They're not saying it as much now, interesting, but you know, if we are all in this together, then why isn't the CERB, the income supports, accessible to everyone? Why do you need to have a SIN number in order to access it, for example? So we launched this campaign, and there's a link there, and I'll share it in the chat as well. We just really wanted to itemize all of the different ways that COVID, as well as the health measures, were impacting non-status women. There was some increased attention to domestic violence as well, and the rates of domestic violence going up under stay-at-home rules. But again, we know that non-status women often have a harder time accessing protections. There's fear of deportation. There's fear of the impacts on their immigration status. Many are doing the frontline essential work as well, and are feeling like they have to go to work, even if they're not feeling well. So there's so many different kind of dimensions. We know that housing, food, access to healthcare are all, fundamental things that everyone needs a fair chance to be able to access, but there are many barriers. So you'll notice there's a second link there where the wonderful folks at the Schleifer Clinic, who are part of our network as well, pulled together a list of resources, so links to where you can access healthcare if you need it. What does the moratorium on evictions mean for you if you don't have status? So, so that's there for you to share. And then we've got a second slide there. We are also doing a virtual presentation of this campaign and our demands and the resources with some updates on what has changed. Unfortunately, not that much has changed for the better, but there are strategies that we're using. There are some changes that are positive, so we want to give an update, and so we're doing that tomorrow. So if you want to flip to the next slide there. This is being co-hosted by our network and the Schleifer Clinic. We're going to go through, itemize some of the legal changes for income supports, for food, for health, for evictions and housing, and then share some resources. And it's an opportunity for you to connect with our network. We're open, we meet virtually. So now we used to meet in person all the time, but now we're meeting virtually. So you don't necessarily have to be in Toronto anymore to be part of our network, and we'll be meeting to do more of this type of campaign work. If you'd like to endorse our campaign as well, you can attend this presentation and find out how to do that. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Selena. All right, so now we are on to the last question for our speakers in our roundtable. And we will start again with Lolly. This speaks to the COVID-19 crisis that we are all facing now. In the context of COVID-19, why is the work of community advocacy and centering of non-status refugee and immigrant women's experiences and their particular vulnerabilities especially critical at this time?
Well, it's, as Deepa had been saying, and also Selena and even Carolina, thank you very much for your experience, is that one of the things is very important because many of the women, especially with non-status, many people didn't have access to all the emergency funds. One of the things that we challenged as an organization and also to start doing advocacy was to do different letters, open letters to calling to all the governments that we are all on this together, means everybody should have access to all these services and all the emergency fund. That didn't happen. One of the things that we were doing during the work, and we're still working, is that we become, and one of the that we did in our organization is that not just to provide services, but we become a kind of full income security. We started a campaign that we called from our table to yours, and was we start with all the to knocking the doors everywhere to start distributing grocery cards. And when we did opening for all non-status, and we have all the information, and 90% of the population that they came and they apply for the grocery cards and that we are still doing is women. Why is important and that we do the non-status with experience? Because they are women that they have been in the frontline workers, especially with the COVID-19. They have been working in the cleaning. They have been working even as a PSW. They have been working on the taking care of the children, with the babysitting. They have been working and even in the construction. And when everything shut down, they were without any access, no access to pay the rent, no access to pay for food, no access to really to try to keep themselves in the place where they manage. Plus, on top of that, many of them, as we have been seeing, living together in the same place with their partners, the domestic violence increased. The phone calls went all over. And one of the things that we start seeing what is that we need to do to react with the COVID-19. Even though it has to be solved by the government, but civil society, we have responsibility that if the government doesn't do, we step up and to shame them, no? Because that's when civil society step up, is to tell them what are their weakness as a government. And one of the things that we are doing that, we become food drivers. We have been distributing food every week to women and children. And also we were receiving some funding from Ocasi through foundations to help them with the rent assistance. And one of the most important that we did is that to really make sure that governments, all the governments, the federal government, we sent that open letter, but we did with the provincial government and together with the doctors uh, for OHIP for all, and also with other organization networks. That's what I say is very important to work in a network. We were pushing to the province of Ontario, to have access to health for all. And what is, because based on COVID-19, even whatever they mention is because it's a public health, but now people without status, they have access to health, they can go to the hospital, and they don't need to pay. Even though some hospitals, they were saying no, we start shaming on them publicly, and they have to provide the services. This is the most important when you do with the advocacy. The other element that we were doing is that we also, the city of Toronto, we call Sanctuary City. We were pushing and we sent a letter to the mayor. Why we cannot have access, people without status, at least an emergency for social services for Ontario Works. And what we did, they didn't open the Ontario Works because they were saying that it's provincial. But one of the things is that we managed to distribute with other organizations grocery cards. And that way, for us, was a COVID-19, not just is the pandemic, but also show what is the injustice and how women having been on the top of the importance to be important in the society. One, if you see many women, they have been stopped working because they need to take care of the children, because they shut down everything and we have to go back to the house. And that's really is something that we need to analyze. Why not to really on the protection, we can continue supporting and giving more childcare or subsidized care? Why with the housing? Why now is that you can be evicted, even no need to have a hearing? Because you can receive the eviction letter in place. Who are the most affected? The shelters are going to be also filled up. And that's one of the things that give us and who are the most affected. Because Deepa talk about racialized women, but this is the big reality, the big gap that we have been seeing of inequality and inequity with with COVID-19 was really in a place that the governments, they should act. Right now they are throwing money everywhere to try to stop with COVID. But the people who were beneficial was not the non-status women. And there were also even refugee claimants that they were not working. They didn't have access to that, even though they have access to the limitation of Ontario Works. And that's something that we need to do, a data, and to collect that information in a way that we can continue doing advocacy, in a way that we need to shrink the gap that is with the injustice about with a racialized woman and especially non-status women.
Mm-hmm.
And make them accountable. I was having in my note accountability, because the government has to be accountable. It's not us, the grassroots organizations, that wherever we need to provide the services, I'm not asking the government to do it because it's not fair, and it's not fair in a way that they don't know how to do it. It's our role as a civil society, but we need to make them accountable. That a big number of people, at least in Toronto, they were not having access to the emergency fund, and they are providing and contributing to the economy to this country. That's it.
Thank you, Loli. Thank you so much.
Okay, on to Fatima. Same question. In the context of COVID-19, why is the work of community advocacy and the centering of non-status refugee and immigrant women's experiences, in particular vulnerabilities, especially critical at this time?
Well, I think if we look at who we're serving in our client group, I mean, it really talks about vulnerable women, you know, racialized women, vulnerable women based on poverty, lack of access to services, education, and so on. So all of that is now compounded by this whole COVID situation. And unfortunately, in our community, we have one of the highest rates in the city of Toronto of positive COVID testing. So that puts it into context for us. I think we have an unhealthy community that's driven by poverty. And, you know, so that becomes a critical issue for us, whether, you know, you're status or non-status, and, you know, how much access do you have to nutritious food that's going to support your good health? And we know that a lot of the women in our community who are racialized women are working in long-term care facilities. They're working in, you know, in grocery stores, or, you know, a lot of our clients are working for Amazon and experiencing situations and concerns and fears, you know. So those are the things that we are seeing happening locally in our community that are impacting us and making our response to COVID more immediate and I guess increasing the urgency in how we're going to address that. You know, I'm not going to talk about from a frontline perspective. I mean, you know, we've gone back to remember the old days when we were, you know, giving people food, delivering food. You know, we've had to go back to a different structure of how we deliver services many, many years ago because of the limitations that we had with COVID. I like to focus on a client organizational perspective. You know, what we're seeing, the experiences of our female clients is going to be reflected in our organization. It's predominantly female. You know, the fact that we're seeing the issues that our clients are facing, we're also facing within within our own staffing situation, particularly with regards to what I call like the 4 Ds: digital equity, digital fluency, digital infrastructure capacity, and data deluge. You know, as our clients don't have access to, you know, digital equity doesn't exist among our clients, you know, having access to internet, having access to equipment, cell phones, data plans. You know, we have the school boards who were coming up with a policy to give our clients a laptop, but it's 1 per family, but you may have 4 kids. And how does that work? And so as organizations, we've had to step up in order to provide our staff with those supports, as well as address the fact that these inequities exist and are exacerbated by COVID. And the fact that even as organizations, some of us may don't have that kind of digital fluency. Were we able to pivot quickly in order to provide services online to our clients? What has been the cost to our organizations and how we get to our clients? You know, I have my staff doing WhatsApp sessions with 3 people on the phone. You know, we have Skype. Some clients have digital fluency and they're well prepared, but we're also finding that the women are doing more of the care in the home and taking care of women's work in the home, and they're being impacted by our ability to their ability to access our services. So I think there's that whole COVID has really highlighted our societal inequities with regards to women and, you know, non-status women, refugee and immigrant women, and how that has really made a huge impact on our particular client group, you know. And if I'm looking at further down the road, and I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't want to have us lose sight of this, is I think that, you know, when all this settles out, when the dust settles, and we know that we're going to be faced with huge deficits, and that we know that women's services and programs for women are going to be the first to go. And so we need to be aware of that. And so how do we plan for that for the future as organizations, and keep, as Loli is saying, keeping them accountable to this in the future, and not, you know, and I've heard it said before in the past that cuts to women's services, you know, are pitted against the context of the greater good for society. So we're not part of society. Sometimes makes me really angry. And women's rights are human rights, and I often say that to our funders, and I talk to some of my government officials, and you say you can't pit one group against another without having to look at how that's going to impact that group, and what are the higher degree of proportion of disadvantage to that particular client group, and especially women. And I know in my community, we have a large women-led families, and what this whole COVID has meant for them. We have women who are experiencing who they're working in precarious jobs, putting them at risk for COVID, but have nowhere to self-isolate. And so again, how does that play out in the health of a community? And so for us as an organization, we've had to, almost like become acrobats in finding ways in which we can jump over hurdles and come up with strategies and solutions to provide services to our clients because of the community that we're in. And poverty is one of the biggest driving factors in leading our COVID numbers in our community, and that's unfortunate. How do we address that in the long term from this perspective, and knowing that COVID funding is accessible right now to some groups, but in the end, when all this settles, what does that really mean on a long-term plan and goal? I don't see that there, but not losing sight of it, and working with our elected government officials to make sure that they don't lose sight of it as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Fatima, for that excellent response. Now I would ask Deepa, do you have any sort of comments you'd like to wrap up with? I know you spoke to this concept a little bit earlier. Anything else come to mind before we call it a day? Oh, you're on mute, Deepa.
So I'm sorry. I was saying I'm sorry on mute. So obviously you all did not hear that either. So I'm sorry about that. A couple of things that come to my mind, but I think what Fatima and Loli just said are a really, really important factors. So say for example, at the clinic, we tried to get cell phones and tablets and SIM cards available to women. We tried to get as much donations as possible and reach out to as many people to get the donation food cards, because we didn't have the capacity to deliver the food, but we were like, if we can get the gift cards out to as many as women, including non-status women, but to also to other vulnerable populations. Now, the thing about recovery piece, which Fatima is talking about, is really the key. The GBV A+ analysis that everyone keeps talking about, if that does not include non-status and immigrant women and refugee women, then obviously it's incomplete. So thinking about that recovery piece is really important. And thinking about that, why is it really, really, really important to keep that issue alive, alert, and relevant while we are navigating this this COVID, what is going to happen on the other side of the COVID, or even if the COVID is not resolved and it becomes another virus which we learn to live with. Like, who knows? The uncertainty of it all is also an important factor for a lot of us to think about and be like, if we put a hiatus on the advocacy right now, how long are we putting this a hiatus for, right? So therefore, I think it's really important to keep our eyes on the goal of that the advocacy cannot be dropped, because we don't know what all uncertainties are wrapped up in this experience. I really like what Arundhati Roy recently wrote in an article. I'm a big fan of hers, and then she wrote this article, beautiful article about the COVID-19 global response to COVID-19, and she said that either we can choose to go on the other side with lighter bags and hope for a new world, or we can keep all our problems and all our struggles of being discriminatory against vulnerable populations and continue. And as Fatima is saying, in some cases, maybe thinking about how do we drop funding for women sector. Although there is one factor which is really important, and I would ask all of you to engage with that a little bit more. I would welcome you to think about it and how do you engage with it. United Nations is watching every country's response to it. They have mechanisms which have opened up right now where you can send submissions to them to talk about what is Canada's response. So I collaborated with a whole bunch of fantabulous feminists, and we submitted to the United Nations Special Rapporteur around the Canada's response to gender-based violence during COVID-19. Canada was delayed, like we were almost like 10 or 15 days behind. We first said stay at home, and then we said, oh yes, oops, we made a mistake. Actually staying at home can mean that you can actually be experiencing more violence, and it can be even more dangerous, right? So we had to remind them that their messaging was wrong. So thinking about that other place to collaborate and think about that there are mechanisms which are like their big brothers watching them. So make sure that you engage with that system, making sure that you engage with your political system. So HUMA, the committee which has all the member of parliaments part of it, is accepting briefs on recovery. So make sure thinking about those, look at those briefs. What are people saying in the times of recovery? What's going to happen? I know that the clinic submitted a brief, but we are one of many, many, many out there, right? So watching that space is really important. And lastly, thinking about collaborations. So I know that Rights of Non-Status Women Network, all of us, we are natural partners, but there are partners who are outside this preview, right? So thinking about those. So for first time ever, we partnered with a group of medical advocates, not the ones who are necessarily already doing the work, but who are new to the reality, who recently in the wake of COVID-19 realized that this is impacting their patients. This is impacting their populations. And we collaborated and created a couple of infographics for patients, as well as in their language, patients, I would say survivors, as well as doctors, to how to connect folks with our services, not only ours, but the sector-wide services. So thinking about the partners outside our usual comfort zone is really important. I mean, I am very proud of the work Schleifer has been doing with Rights of Non-Status Women Network. Watching those spaces is really important. And remember, sometimes there is a muzzling impact, definitely, of the funding, but then we can create spaces which are not funded, like the network, right? And say what we need to say. There is more power in for us to come together. We need to be strategic in watching our interests, but at the same time, when we know that our survivors and the people we work with, they need the advocacy, we need to find the ways to do that. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for all of your comments, and really this emphasis, as you said, to be strategic, the collaboration, the significance that Loli also mentioned around accountability. And I think also what really stood out is just, you know, we're hearing about kind of the legacies of this advocacy work, and how much, you know, that history, that narrative is so important for us to also keep in mind, and what that will look like in the future, and what to already be kind of thinking ahead. Especially when we think, you know, this idea of going back to normal for whom, and making sure that this political window still stays open. I want to say we only have just a few more minutes tonight, so I do really want to thank everybody who's participated today on the call. It is very much a reflection of how this project has been also kind of working together to try to develop more of a collaboration and partnerships. And so for those of you who are on the call, I do want to invite you to stay connected to our efforts and to our work. There are, we are hosting these roundtable series in different regions, as we mentioned, regions that are we're partnered with in this project. So there's going to be further roundtables, and it's great to hear. We're going to hear from our partners in Fredericton, in Edmonton, Vancouver, and Ottawa. So we'll be able to also reflect on the great community-based advocacy work that's taking place there, the great efforts around survivor-led models and survivor-centered work as well. So please sign up for the upcoming roundtables, and you'll notice that we're also encouraging you to stay connected with our project and become part of our mailing list, so you can see what other events are taking place. We share the recordings, we share summaries of these roundtables, and as we shared in the very beginning, all of this information is so important to continue to inform this blueprint in progress that is taking place with these conversations. These conversations are really valuable, a part of all of that, and we hope to see you at our next event. Yasmin, thank you so much for co-hosting with us, and Mira, Habi, that was attentive to the chat. We didn't have enough time for the Q&A period. We're able to provide a summary on our website, and hopefully we're going to be able to kind of continue to have these conversations and attend to these ongoing questions. Thank you to everyone for your participation. Carolina, Selena, I can see your video still there, so thank you so much as well. Thank you. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe, everyone. We'll get through this. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Stephanie. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. I'm going to just stop the sharing and close the, let's see. Not sure if you can still see my screen, Nira. It's still up, right?
Yeah. Should we close the session for participants? Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, just 1 second, because my screen for some reason isn't. All right. Thank you, Carolina.
All right. Just us. Thank you so much.
You were fantastic, Carolina. It was really great. It's always nerve-wracking, but you were awesome.
Yes, it's always a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it was really good. It was really well attended, and I love the conversation between those three.
Yeah,
it was great. It was really, really good.
Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I am
sorry. No, yes, okay.
No.
No, I got nervous at a point because I was thinking, because I don't know, when I try to answer one thing and then there's a movie going in my brain. I'm trying to like pick pieces of it and just say something that's wraps it up, and then I realize that I'm starting to get into a different subject, and then I just no, that's not what I was talking about in the first place. And then
I think there's so many different
to say
ways
something
to
like
share, and I like the way that you shared, like the way you shared the story, the way that you decided to do that was great, and you could see the responses. I think a lot of people were really grateful that you were on the call and were able to participate, for sure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I actually feel flattered to be here and be talking to you guys. Have the the opportunity to do so, because it's tough out there, but it's nice that you guys opened up this space for us to feel some dignity back again in life. That's really important, the work you girls do. Like, I'm very much happy for you and thankful for all of that.
Well,
absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating, and you're at work. I mean, you're taking time to do this.
You're at work, yeah.
Very much.
Yeah, I was off actually. I just came for emergency, and then they called me in the morning to ask if I could help with something. And then I like to do that because I love my job, so I don't mind coming here and helping out. Like, I work with chocolate. Look at this. I'm just gonna show you guys right now.
Yeah, show us.
This is I'm facing this right now.
Oh no, I think my camera's frozen. I can't see.
These are all chocolate bars all over the place. You see?
You can. Oh, there.
Oh, I know that chocolate brand.
Do you know
Is that
them?
so
Are
much?
they lovely?
I've seen that chocolate brown. It's
Chocoso.
Choco Soul. Oh
Oh,
my
yes, Choco. Yeah.
Yeah, Chocoso.
God, Choco Soul. It's I think it's the Oaxacan or Chiapaneca Mexican bean. No.
Yes,
Wow.
yes,
Exactly.
yes.
They would get big shipment of coffee that's from Oaxaca as well. They were out of it. And then we just had to like fulfill a bunch of orders that we're painting for people waiting for our coffee. That's a bit crazy. But I did everything, literally everything I had to do before this call. And then it was funny because like my computer, charger was not working properly. My computer's almost dying, and then I was in the front, but then my coworkers, which happen to be like great women as well. One of them is studying to be a psychologist, and she's like super feminist and everything. Like everyone here are like all these people are extremely conscious. Like it's really good to be around them because they're extremely conscious. Like they do the fair trading cacao thing, chocolate thing, and then it's also like they live this like philosophy of respecting nature, respecting society, giving people opportunities and everything. And they realized I was struggling a little bit with the computer, and then Sally came back here. She's like, no, go to my room. I went to here with her. I don't know if your girls saw it. The camera was on. And they all started carrying my stuff. One grabbed the laptop, the other one grabbed the backpack, the other one brought my food in here, and they brought it all together. All the two girls like following me with everything to the back, and then 2 minutes before we start, I was settled. Everything was here, and Salia also left her laptop right there. I don't know if you can see it. Her laptop is there because she's like, if you get out of battery or something, take my laptop and do this, because they know. I told them everything, so
That is so. It looks like
it's also great because
they care about you.
Like
That's
now that I'm back on track in my life, I have my dignity. Oh, they do very much. Like it's a place that I feel completely safe and comfortable to talk about this because like in society, kind of hard to say like, yes, I'm a divorced woman, which happens to be immigrant and everything, all this type of thing. But over here, that just simply does not exist. And actually, we were just seeing here amongst ourselves that we will do open tables like that. We're going to do open talks like that amongst us, the employees, in terms of, social issues and social justice. What is it that we can do? How Chipotle can help us and everything. Like, what is it that you are personally going through that the company could be aware of and things like that. So it's like, it's a wonderful place to be.
Well, I'm happy. That sounds great. And I like what you said, that it's not just their philosophy around the chocolate, like they're also extending that in the way they practice their work model. Like that sounds great.
100%.
Even more reason
100%.
now that to support Choco Soul, even though it's already.
Yeah, 100%. Like they are absolutely everything that they say in their labels. It's just wonderful. It's funny that all of this happened over here today, and the girls helped me with the call. They came after me to my stuff, and then I'm talking to them about these and all the women. Oh my God, it's just crazy.
Yeah, that is a lot, and it's, I guess, we're gonna have to keep you connected. We'd love to keep you connected, not have to, but if you'd like to stay connected as the process goes, would be great.
Yeah, I would love to, for sure. And then right now there are some like good news coming up in my life. I just recently opened up a business, and we're also in the food industry. And it's just like right now I'm looking for the whole licensing and the standards. What does it take? Like what is it that the city of Toronto requires for you to have like a food business and everything? So like me and my former co-workers that later became roommates and then nowadays are business partners, we're working on this. So we also are like very much into the whole just social justice thing. And even though like everything is just starting, like I'm looking forward to give back to the society all the goodness that I've received so far through my challenges and everything. So like I'm actually looking forward to give back.
So you're opening a business, Carolina?
It's open already. It's official. So
nice.
I just Yeah, we're just working in the background to get everything settled to get started and start selling and everything.
That's
Because we finally
fantastic.
got to our recipe. Yeah, we're doing the same thing kind of like Soul does. We're doing all local suppliers. So we're buying from like local farmers.